So hello, Mr. John Boyle, and thank you for joining me today.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
So for those of you watching, this is the second in a series of interviews being conducted by the IRSM Emerging Risk Leaders Network, whereby we speak with high-profile risk professionals such as John to hear about their experiences and also their views on risk management now and into the future. So the interview is made up of 10 questions, which have been shortlisted from a pool of over 30 submitted by members of the Emerging Risk Leaders Network. So John, before we get started, please can you briefly introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, my name's John Boyle. I'm Director of Health, Safety and Environment for a company called Greencore, with one of the largest food manufacturers in the UK and Europe.
Thanks, John. So John, just a pre-warning, this interview, it's about you and your experiences. So I'm going to try my best to stick to the script and the questions and let you do the majority of the talking. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great.
Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. And the first question, John, what are your biggest personal lessons you've learned from your time as a risk professional?
I think when I started out, I think I thought it was all about technical skills and technical knowledge. And actually, once you've done your NEBOSH or once you've done your degree, your learning starts from that point. And actually, I don't like to call them softer skills, but the extra skills that make you function effectively as a professional, and including building relationships and influencing others, are probably far more important, or as important as the technical skills themselves. And and I came into this profession thinking I'd just be a technical expert, when actually that's only the part. That's the first part of the learning, and the learning starts after that.
John, that leads me nicely into the next question. So what soft skills, as you mentioned, and transferable skills did risk professionals need to succeed? What are the most important ones?
Well, we often have to, depending on where you work and who you work with, and I've worked with a wide variety over my career, is sometimes you've got to influence people, sometimes to do something that they don't want to do. And you actually, I think, being able to be pragmatic is probably one of the biggest things. Being able to communicate effectively with others, to coach and build understanding and create learning, to try and sell a need to do something, not just for the financial, legal and moral reasons. It's building the relationships with the people, so they do it because they trust you and they want to do it, because it's the right thing to do and they believe they don't need to do it. Sometimes think if you have to go to the moral reason or the financial or the legal reason, I sometimes feel you've failed at that point.
Interesting, yeah.
I think, but it's more around, you've got to build relationships, you've got to build partnerships, you've got to develop understanding, and you've got to take the time to do that and realise that's just as important as doing the technical part of the job.
Brilliant. And that, as we've spoke about before, that ultimately leads to that ownership, that empowerment and that ownership ultimately, which is what you want.
Yeah, because if we try to influence, we're one person with a very big remit and a lot of things to do. Whereas if we get everybody doing a little bit, it creates a massive army behind you and a massive journey in the right direction. And and those are the soft skills and the transferable skills. Investing in yourself, spending time to learn, not just about the theory about how to lead effectively, how to influence, how to communicate, how to self-reflect and learn on yourself, are really important skills, and you should take the time to do that, in addition to keeping your technical skills healthy and up to date.
Excellent. No, really good bit of advice there. John, obviously, I'm interested in this next one. You being at the level you are, HSC director for such a big company, would you say that a risk professional and a business leader can be the same thing? Or are they compatible?
I think if I asked my CEO that question, he would say yes. And I can see this. You know, they're never going to be, you know, my CEO is never going to be the technical expert that I am. But you know, all leaders, you know, a CEO is probably the most fundamental person that looks at risk across all different facets. You know, whether you think financial, IT, people, commercial, sales, safety, environment, you know, and it's, you know, so I definitely do think that a risk professional and a business leader go hand in hand, and they should go hand in hand more than they do now. They're not separate and they're not exclusive. They need to be integrated, so it's not a fringe subject that sits on the side.
And leading to the next question then, is the business case for risk management on all levels provided strongly enough, in your opinion?
I think the business case for risk management, it varies at different levels and with different skills and different trades, whether it be commercial, NPD, that's product development or ops, or the legal team. All of them will have you know, different sort of perceptions. So your business case has got to change to reflect, you know, what they do. And I think the business case for risk management is stronger than ever, because we've probably actually recently gone through, you know, we've gone through an event that nobody ever thought would happen within their lifetime. And they've actually seen it and seen how painful it is, and it's fundamentally affected them. The challenge, the trick we've got and the challenge we've got is how we make the business case that COVID has brought relevant to the day job. And
yeah,
we can continue that on.
And John, do you think that the business case then for risk management, do you think the pandemic has strengthened that?
Fundamentally, yes. I think, you know, right at the start of the pandemic, you know, COVID came onto my sort of radar back in December. And, you know, I'm a HSE professional, and I saw this as something that could influence us. I saw that I had skills. I didn't know about COVID. I didn't know about pandemics necessarily. But we're great at researching. We're great at influencing other. We're great at mobilising a team of multiple stakeholders and bringing them together. And I saw it as an opportunity for me to add value to the business. And, you know, we had our first crisis meeting in January of the year before the lockdown, and it was focused mainly around supply and mainly around our people that were travelling around the world. So it was procurement, HR, people like that involved. Because if there's disruptions to any of that, that brings disruptions and upset into the business, which has a direct impact on the physical health and safety and the mental health and well-being of the colleagues in there. So it's a loose, tenuous link, but it was somewhere that I could add value. That very quickly, as the pandemic moved into Europe, changed the focus from a procurement issue to a people and a health issue, fundamentally, and a business continuity issue. So it really did strengthen the risk management profession. And I think as a profession, we must really reflect on how we take that momentum and take that passion that everybody's got and awareness everybody's got and continue that into day-to-day risk management.
Going back to one of the earlier questions as well, John, we talked about transferable skills, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. All of us risk professionals new to COVID, but applying the same principles to this new risk, we're all, you know, able to control it. So
yeah, and we've become experts in things that we never thought we'd be experts in. You know, at the start of the pandemic, established links with other food businesses. I established links with the HSE. I established links with PHE and the government, and started to build those relationships and those ways of working. And you know, because you feel, I could think you're filling up a sweetie jar of goodness and relationship and goodwill. And then when the pandemic or something happens and you need to draw on that, you've already got those bonds, you've got those things that you can pull on. which effectively gets you into the arena where you can have input into policy. You can see stuff coming before it happens. You can share ideas with other businesses, so you all collectively remain consistent, but also share learning and knowledge. And that's a fundamental part of risk management, is, looking outside the business. And I know I've wandered off subject a little bit there, but
no, and obviously you found that within the food and drink industry, a collective approach, all the heads coming together to look at the smart objective and the best controls.
Yeah, definitely. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a network of nearly 40 businesses that got together, met on a weekly basis, shared what was going on. So when one of our, another food company was going through an outbreak, they could tell us what their experience was like and the things they were going through. And it was an open, no judgment, Chatham House rules, open sort of environment to share best practice and learn from each other. Because, there are no commercial boundaries as far as I'm concerned, as far as safety goes. And we should openly share and work together collectively. And a risk professional is ideally placed to foster those sorts of relationships.
Yeah, and that highlights the importance of those working groups and networking ultimately, doesn't it? So, John, there's going to be a lot of viewers who are new to the profession, maybe coming into their first managerial role. I'm quite interested to hear your answer to this one. How do you establish suitable KPIs, and what's your benchmarking process?
It varies by business. You have to look at what drives a business forward. So the business I work for is very action focused. They get stuff done. The food industry typically moves quickly at pace, as you will know, and they're very good at just getting stuff done. So, me looking back at a reactive trend that's already happened is not going to float the boat and is not going to interest them. Most of my KPIs actually are on action completion, on engagement, on learning events, on leadership walks, and if I do look at any reactive trends, whether they be accidents, near misses, or something we call near miss with potential for RIDDOR, so a serious near miss, it's all focused on learning, trends, patterns, safety improvement groups. I do not report on frequency rates or anything, except
very interesting. Yeah.
Except with discussions with the board, just to look at general trends and patterns and understanding the reasons why it's going up and down. I haven't set targets for a reduction, and my exec haven't set targets for reduction. We have set targets for the amount of time a manager engages with people and has conversations and walks, the amount of behavioural conversations people have. If there is an initiative and there's a load of actions that need completed, they will have it written into their performance objectives to get those actions completed and get that done. So you're using normal management process to drive a safety agenda and not marginalising a safety subject. And those KPIs sit with the management. They don't sit with the SHE manager. They sit with the general manager, and he's held accountable by the ops director. And the ops director then sits in front of me and the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and openly talks about what they've achieved and how they've achieved it, and whether they're on target and whether they need resource and help from me. We don't look in the rearview mirror.
So a sole focus on leading indicators.
Yes.
On that dashboard for your site.
Yeah, and any reactive ones tend to focus on, so for example, if you have a load of conversations and observations that involve, I don't know, workplace transport segregation, for example, set up an improvement group to focus on that and understand the reasons why. But then share those learnings from those events with other businesses of best practice and things, and just crack on and get it sorted. Because quite often with some of the biggest incidents I've ever seen, you don't get loads of them, but you'll have loads of near misses. So it's focusing on, the improvement groups that you can set up. But if you naturally get things fixed, naturally progress your actions, naturally engage and talk with people, you develop a people-led culture where it becomes the core and it becomes important to everybody, and they actually see that it's important. That your reactive stats will sort themselves out.
Brilliant, John.
Once you've focused on all that stuff.
Thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned this earlier when we were talking about influencing people. You touched on the three pillars: financial, legal, and moral. Which do you find you most commonly use to influence others?
I very rarely use those. Obviously, it depends on the type of business. If a business is very financially focused, then that's a good thing to use. Normally, if you're talking about legal reasons, it means you know something's happened or there's going to be consequences. You know, you're in quite an abrasive conversation there, quite an aggressive conversation. And you know, morally, you know, I've always found that most people I've ever come across do not want to hurt somebody and do not want people to go home hurt. Quite often, they will have somebody like ourselves coming to them and telling them to do something they don't think they need to do. But if you create understanding and a bit of knowledge about why it needs to be done and the benefit that it will have, and I'm not talking about law, I'm not talking about, you know, give practical examples. You know, I've gone into businesses before, for example, where they've not seen workplace transport as a risk. And I've got the person who thought that to actually stand and just watch a yard and watch some activity. And actually, they came away from that feeling very uncomfortable. It creates, you know, the biggest impact you can have is you create an emotional reaction. And, you know, so that person is now, they'll walk into a forklift truck area and you'll see that they're looking where the trucks are and they're nervous because I've created a bit of understanding and a bit of awareness and a bit of reasons and a bit how big the ouch will be. So that's probably pulling on the moral reason. You know, it's changing. You know, and if I have to use the financial and legal reason, financial, it's purely for business case because it will help get that through.
Yeah, every time, yeah.
If you have to use the legal reason, then you're probably not in a great place, to be honest. I very rarely use it. I very rarely quote law. I very rarely spout legislation or anything, unless we are in a discussion about possible action, for example.
So it was sticking to the moral where we can,
yeah.
And the education piece.
Education definitely is the strongest thing. Create understanding and awareness. And because most people generally don't want to hurt people, they'll quite often do it. They'll do it quite often without, if they don't want to do it, then is it the right type of business to be working for?
Yeah, good point, good point. So, John, thinking ahead, what do you think will be the key risks in 2030 in our industry?
Well, you know, I think, you know, COVID, the impact from COVID and the mental health and well-being is going to have a lasting impact, I think. We've had a generational change in a very short space of time. I don't think the labour market is going to return to exactly as it was before. I think people's expectations have been reset in terms of, and it's going to take a couple of years for that to settle down into a new norm.
Yeah.
And I don't think it'll go back to, it'll be a new norm. You know, so, but I definitely think, you know, burnout and mental health in the shorter term is a key thing we need to focus on. And that's not just for ourselves, but our colleagues, because the pain and turbulence we've been through as a profession, you know, needs to be recognised. You know, personally at the moment, I think, you know, I'm moving the normal risk agenda along. You know, if I look at risk outside the HSE arena, you know, your emerging threats from cyber and various other things, which heavily impact, you know, can heavily impact a business. But you know, it's quite interesting with, you know, the COP running at the moment. You know, the science-based targets and net zero is very, very at the forefront of my mind at the moment in terms of a longer-term objective, and Greenco's objectives to meet the science-based targets and net zero, which set dates.
Net zero, yeah, that is the buzzword at the minute that we're hearing about all the time on the news. So in our industry, John, obviously we've got the climate change agreements. It's going to be interesting to see what comes in the next few years, because obviously that's moving away, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you, and I, as a risk professional, we can touch and add value to loads of other things outside health and safety. We can have knowledge and awareness of commercial and supplier risks and changing customer demands, because, and I always take the time to learn what the commercial team, what the commercial director's going through, how our supplier market's changing, because all those things influence the business. Actually, influence the risk appetite generally, and their capability to do the health and safety part of it. But no, it's shorter term mental health and well-being, and a reset of the labour market, changes in terms of languages. But a big focus of mine in this particular moment in time for this year is setting a net zero roadmap and meeting the science-based targets.
John, sticking to that short-term mental health and well-being risk brings me on to the next question. So ISO 45003, it's going to be the first global standard giving guidance on managing psychological health in the workplace. What do you think will be the biggest barriers for organizations recognizing and managing mental health risks compared to the more physical risks that we're used to?
I think it's an interesting standard if you've looked at it, because it's actually part of the suite of 45001 and sits very nicely with it and adds to it in terms of managing mental health. You have to ask yourself some very difficult questions if you look at that standard, and acknowledge some quite difficult things as a team, and you've got to make it a safe space to do that. I think the challenge you have, it's very difficult to quantify what's work related and what's externally influenced.
Of course.
But the two are intertwined, and as a business we've got responsibilities to do that. I think quite often, if you look at how we're trained as professionals, are we really trained enough and have got the skills enough to understand mental health and well-being and what to do about it? And if we ask ourselves that question, what chance have the managers in the business got to understand when they're spinning 20 plates?
Really good.
And I think you've got to give the managers and the teams on the shop floor the skills to talk about it and to know what to do about it, and also identify where the hotspots are as a business. And these are quite challenging things for a business to address. But unless you increase that level of awareness and understanding first, you're going to struggle to get that standard in. But I do know businesses that have got it and gone for it. And I met with them recently actually to understand their journey. And the business had to go through some realistic self-reflections as an exec and leadership team, not just about the way the business operated, but it's their own behaviour as well.
Right. Okay.
So exec buy-in. If you haven't got exec buy-in, then you're going to struggle to get that standard in. But you can get your exec behind it and justify the benefits that the standard will give. You'll need their help to push that through.
It's interesting that you're familiar with businesses that have already put it into place. I spoke on this on a previous discussion. Businesses are taking baby steps and moving in the right direction. We look at mental health first aid, but that is just scratching the surface. And as you're saying, as you mentioned, it's really going back to the basics, isn't it? With this, a fundamental change. So it'll be interesting to see how businesses do evolve in the coming years.
Yeah, and but I think it's definitely something as a profession we need to head into. We need to educate ourselves about it first, so we could advise businesses how to go on this journey. The dynamic is changing, and there's challenges on people now that were never there years ago. And I do think that COVID and the pandemic has caused quite reasonable damage. If you think of that sweetie jar of resilience,
Yeah.
if we've taken more out of that jar than what we've put in over the last couple of years.
Just the crumbs left. Yeah.
Yeah, and all you need is something relatively little to then kick that empty bucket down the road. But so I think we've got some fixing to do, and now is probably a good time to sort of head into these sorts of things, because I think I know the leaders I've spoke to, they're very aware of this challenge and they're very aware of this problem, and if you can get them motivated behind 45,003 and put a roadmap together for it and get their buy-in, now's probably a good time to do it while it's vader.
Yeah, buy-in is strong now, we would say. Yeah. Okay. So John, last question. So this is focusing on your experiences, John Boyle's experiences. Have you ever made a wrong call, and how did it play out, and what changes did you make as a consequence?
Okay, I've probably made a couple actually, and I think it's important to recognise that you're never going to get it all. I probably can't talk about any specific examples, but I've definitely you've got to look at making the wrong call. It will, I've had a couple that have hurt emotionally, and you really sort of critically evaluate, what I could have done differently. And the trick is to learn from it and to actually think, would I have changed anything different? A big challenge we've got as a profession is if we walk into a business that's got a lot of challenges, we rationally pick the things that we think are going to hit us first and fix those first. It takes time to do our job properly and to take others on the journey to do our job properly. We could all go into a business and fix it, and put a load of systems and processes in and create a beautiful manual that sits on the shelf and never gets used.
Yeah.
To actually slow that journey down and take people on a journey with you and build the system with them so it becomes living and breathing. As long as you've done that and you've moved at pace, you're not always going to get to the things that happen first. You're not going to fix all the things before something happens. It just isn't work. But I think
so it's being realistic in your expectations, really.
Yeah, and and it always makes me look interesting when a business has something bad happen, and they first look at the safety person about what have they missed, why have they not done their job, and and I'm fortunate to say I've never had anything that's resulted in a very serious injury to somebody, and I've made a mistake that way. But I know others that have been through that and just missed something. We cannot spot everything. We need everybody else to have eyes on the subject as well, and all of us spotting. You can't be everywhere all the time. So I'm realistic about what I can achieve. I move at pace. I'm open with my boss and my leaders about the journey we're on, the gaps that we've got, and the things that we've not got to yet. So rather than sitting in isolation, don't sit in isolation. And I think it's all on you. I know loads of SHE managers that have a list of actions.
Oh yeah.
And their general man, is your boss and your general manager aware of it? You don't have to explain the technical stuff, but are they aware of the workload that you've got? And I would even challenge to say, should the action actually sit with the safety professional in the first place? Because actually, you should incorporate the objectives into the engineering manager, the ops manager, or the ops controller, whatever the titles are. And you should all work together in a bit. And I think rather than the changes I've probably made is I drive through others. and I educate others, and I get the responsibility and the accountability where it should sit, and I help them do it. I don't sit and have a big list and try and work with all the different teams to try and get that project going, get that initiative done. You know, I'm able to go into businesses and transform them because I bring everybody else on. And when something does happen, you can all reflect and learn on why we've got, and they don't just look at the she managers and say, why didn't you tell us about this?
That really comes down to that cultural piece, doesn't it, John?
Yeah. Whereas earlier in my career, I was probably had the list, and I was really pushing it all through. And I had this massive list of problems that nobody else was probably aware of, but I was aware of. Because I knew how it should have been. I now spend the time to educate the leaders and agree the plan and the risks and why I've made the decision and work through that. Because sometimes those people will ask a daft question or challenge you or hold you to account or not hold you on your thinking and why you thought that way, but then agree with it collectively together with your boss, with your leader, with your manager, and agree that plan together. Because quite often I've seen that the manager will get nervous and sometimes give you extra resource and extra assistance to sort of push it through. Don't sit in isolation.
That's a really good bit of advice there, John. I'm certainly going to take something away from this conversation. I know that the members of the Emerging Risk Leaders Network will also. So John, that's all the questions, and I guess just a really big thank you from myself and from the Emerging Risk Leaders for joining me and opening up about your experiences and providing this sound advice that you have. So yeah, just a big thank you, John.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me. And
for anyone watching who wants to know more about the Emerging Risk Leaders Network or get involved, please visit our LinkedIn page or the IIRSM website. Thank you very much.